grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi, it's Jo here. On the 21st of March 2013, the Australian government delivered a formal apology to people affected by past forced adoption policies and practices. The apology was delivered by then Prime Minister Julia Gillard in the Great Hall at Parliament House. The apology acknowledged the experiences of those affected, which created a lifelong legacy of pain and suffering. Today is the 10th anniversary of the apology, and we're commemorating it here in Queensland with an event in Brisbane. But we know that not everyone can make it to the anniversary event, so we're dedicating this episode of Adopt Perspective to reflect on the apology and are joined by none other than the woman who delivered it, the Honourable Julia Gillard. We're thrilled to have you join us, Julia.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
You've described delivering the apology as one of the most moving and important moments of your Prime Ministership. Could you tell us more about your personal experience of delivering the apology and what it meant to you at the time?
I remember it as a very remarkable day. It doesn't feel like 10 years ago, but of course it is. And I remember it so strongly, partly because of the feeling in the room as I delivered the apology. I've given a lot of speeches in my lifetime. I gave a lot of speeches as Prime Minister. But there are very, very few occasions where I had that sense of so much emotion in the room. And as I was delivering the apology, looking out on the faces, you can tell how much it meant to the individuals that were immediately hearing it. And even before coming in to deliver the apology, I'd sat that morning with a number of individuals, including a friend of mine who had served on the consultative group in the lead up to the apology and who has his own story. And I listened to individuals tell me about their lives and the impact on them of forced adoption. And, you know, that I think really stays with me, those sort of small, intimate moments, as well as the bigger scale moment of being in the room.
Yeah. You may not know this, but we use an excerpt from the apology in the intro of all of our episodes because we know that many people have yet to hear it or to understand that it might pertain to their own experience. And I regard your delivery of the apology that day as one of the two most powerful speeches of my lifetime. And you delivered both of them. I can imagine you can guess the other one. I worked in communications for many years and I was shattered that there was a leadership challenge on the same day as the apology because I knew it would overshadow the event and bury it in the news coverage of the day, and it did. Can you tell us about that day and how you felt about the two events colliding?
Yeah, I was shattered too. I had a discussion the night before with a political colleague, with Simon Crean, and I knew that there was trouble brewing and the potential that he would trigger a leadership spill or discussion within the Labor Party. And I had urged him to not do anything the next day because of the apology. But the cycle of politics being what it was, he did give a press conference that morning, and that then triggered off those sort of internal political events of the day. And it was, for me, it meant I had to come out of the apology and turn around and deal with those events. And I hadn't wanted to do that. I wanted to be able to just sit and reflect on what we'd all done together through the delivery of the apology. So I was denied that opportunity. But what was much, much more upsetting than that was that I knew it would be overshadowed in the media coverage, and that wasn't fair or right, because it, a big part of its purpose was to be words of comfort and healing for the communities most directly affected, but for it also to be words of education for the whole nation, because there would be, millions of people who'd never in their lives thought about the issue of forced adoptions. And I had hoped that, through the news coverage, they would prick up their ears and they would think there's something here that I should think through or learn about or talk to my family about, try and get to grips with. And the fact that the coverage was overshadowed meant that message got through to fewer people. Now, in the 10 years since, obviously, an apology like that is not just one day or just one news cycle. And the work that you do and that so many others do helps to bring those words and the consideration of forced adoption and the needs of the communities affected back into our conversation. But I know it would have been easier for you and for so many like you if it hadn't been overshadowed on that day.
Yeah. In 2020, I interviewed Naim Mushin, who many listeners will know as a former family court judge who chaired the Forced Adoption Apology Reference Group. And I asked him about his recollections of that day, and he spoke so highly about how you gave no hint of what it was about to transpire behind the scenes. And when the reference group met with you that morning, he said you were fully focused and present, and you even included some of the things that you were told in that meeting in your speech a short time later. So this isn't a question. However, I just wanted to thank you for that and assure you that your efforts were visible and appreciated by those in attendance. And even now, when I rewatched the apology in preparation for this interview, I could see it as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But today we also listen to the words and stories of those who have waited so long to be heard. Like the members of the reference group, personally affected by forced adoption, who I met earlier today. Lizzie Brew, Catherine Rendell and Christine Cole told me how their children were wrenched away so soon after birth, how they were denied basic support and advice, how the removal of their children led to a lifetime of anguish and pain. Their experiences echo the stories told in the Senate report, stories that speak to us with startling power and moral force, like Linda Bryant, who testified of the devastating moment her baby was taken away. She said, "When I had my child, she was removed. All I saw was the top of her head. I knew she had black hair." So often, that brief glimpse was the final time those mothers would ever see their children. In institutions around Australia, women were made to perform menial labour in kitchens and laundries until their baby arrived. As Margaret Bishop said, it felt like a kind of penance. In recent years, I have occasionally passed what was then the Medindi Maternity Hospital, and it generates a deep sadness in me and an odd feeling that it was a Dickensian tale told about someone else. Margaret McGrath described being confined within the Holy Cross home, where life was, to use her words, harsh, punitive and impersonal. Yet this was sunny post-war Australia, where we were going to the beach and driving our new Holdens and listening to the music of Johnny O'Keefe. Friends, as the time for birth came, these babies would be snatched away before they had even held them in their arms. Sometimes consent was achieved by forgery or fraud. Sometimes women signed adoption papers whilst under the influence of medication. Most common of all was the bullying arrogance of a society that presumed to know what was best. Margaret Nonis was told she was selfish. Linda Nagata was told she was too young and would be a bad mother. Some mothers returned home to be ostracised and to be judged. And despite all the coercion, many mothers were haunted by guilt for having given away their child. Guilt because, in the words of Louise Greenup, they did not buck the system or fight. And friends, the hurt did not simply last for a few days or weeks. This was a wound that would not heal. Kim Lawrence told the Senate committee, "The pain never goes away, that we all gave away our babies. We were told to forget what had happened, but we cannot. It will be with us all for the rest of our lives." Carolyn Brown never forgot her son. She said, "I was always looking and wondering if he was alive or dead. From then on, every time I saw a baby, a little boy, and even a grown-up in the street, I would look to see if I could recognise him." For decades, young mothers grew old, haunted by loss, silently grieving in our suburbs and towns, and somewhere, perhaps even close by, their children grew up, denied the bond that was their birthright. Instead, they lived with self-doubt and an uncertain identity. The feeling, as one child of forced adoption put it, that part of me is missing. Some suffered sexual abuse at the hands of their adoptive parents or in state institutions. Many more endured the cruelty that only children can inflict on their peers. The words, "Your mum's not your real mum didn't want you, your parents aren't your real parents, they don't love you." Taunts vividly remembered decades later. For so many children of forced adoption, the scars remain in adult life. Phil Evans described his life as a roller coaster ride of emotional trauma, indescribable fear, uncertainty, anxiety, and self-sabotage in so many ways. Many others identified the paralysing effect of self-doubt and a fear of abandonment. "It has held me back, stopped me growing, and ensured that I have lived a life frozen." These words have been said. I heard similar stories of disconnection and loss from Lee Hubbard and Paul Howes today. The challenges of reconnecting with family, the struggles with self-identity and self-esteem, the difficulties with accessing records, challenges that even the highest levels of professional success have not been able to assuage or heal. And friends, neither should we forget the fathers, brothers and sisters, grandparents and other relatives who were also affected as the impact of forced adoption cascaded through each family. Gary Coles, a father, told me today of the lack of acknowledgement that many fathers have experienced, how often fathers were ignored at the time of the birth, how their names were not included on birth certificates.
The Senate report estimated that there are as many as 150,000 adoptions between 1951 to 1975 and 250,000 from 1940 to the present day. Because every adoption involves two biological parents, two adoptive parents, other immediate and extended family, and the adopted person themselves, as well as future generations, it is impossible to know how many people have been affected by forced adoption policies and practices. And yet I feel that forced adoption doesn't have near as much community recognition as some other prominent issues that occurred around the same period. Why do you think that is?
I'm not entirely sure. I think, there's a lot, if we look back at the last 10 years and even the, 10 years before that, because the apology didn't just, obviously it was a day, but the lead up processes and the visibility of the issue and the campaigning around the issue had happened for many, many years beforehand. If we contemplate that period, there has been so much to take community attention. And I think because of that, because of the very crowded agenda, it can be very difficult for any one issue to get the amount of attention that it should. Inevitably, I think the depth and breadth of the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in institutional settings meant that there was a lot of focus on that work. And that's a good thing, absolutely a good thing. And I think we're a better nation because we have focused on how to keep children safer from sexual abuse. But I think, as people can only hold so much in their heads, there can only be so much in the media discussion, in the community discussion. It therefore has been harder for this incredibly important issue of forced adoption to have the space that it needs. That, in my view, just means we've got to continue the conversation rather than look back and ask, why wasn't there more airtime or visibility? Sort of look forward and think, what can we do to enhance community understanding? And that's why I think marking this 10-year anniversary is incredibly important. It's, really the 10-year anniversary for, the national moment. Yes, I was the person who delivered the apology, but it was a national moment of saying sorry, and for us to put the spotlight on that and our responsibilities as a whole nation at this time, I think helps bring the issue back to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. Being one of the most recognisable women in Australia, I imagine you are frequently stopped as you move about. Since the apology, have others shared with you their personal reflections about the apology and what it meant to them? And I just wondered if any of those stood out to you.
Yes, I've had many conversations actually, because people do recognise me, so I do get stopped in the street, stopped at airports, stopped in shops, all of that kind of thing. And inevitably, because of the circumstances, you're not necessarily in a very private space, often in a sort of bustling space, a lot of people around. They're hurried conversations. And so I feel sometimes like I don't get the full depth of the personal story, but people want to come and tell me that it mattered to them, and they will give me a quick snapshot of, where they were when they heard the apology or when they first heard it, which was not necessarily on the day, what it's meant to them, their family story, how they've looked for healing and connection in their family. So I always very much enjoy that, learning about it all through someone else's eyes.
Yeah. On the day of the apology, you commented that it is important for a nation and its people to reflect and acknowledge past wrongdoing. How do you see the apology, or this apology, as being important in the history of our nation?
Yeah, I think for the whole nation, it's you only really get to grips with the depths of pain and trauma caused when you acknowledge it and apologise for it. When you actually hold it up and say, we recognise this now and we recognise it in its full force, what happened to people, and we're prepared to acknowledge the accountability that we all collectively have around it. That's what the apology shapes. And so, or is the symbol of. And so I think that's the resonance of it. But the words don't, somehow magically translate into fixing everything. Of course they don't. What they do is they symbolise that kind of recognition and accountability, and then it needs to be put into action over time as people hear the stories of individuals, their reflections, reach out to affected communities. We do what we can to connect people, to support people, to acknowledge their individual trauma in the way that we've acknowledged the trauma broadly.
Yeah. 10 years on, what do you consider to be the key messages that were contained within the apology and their importance as we move into the future?
I think the key messages really are we know, we've seen, we've heard, we know that this happened. No more averting eyes or denials or minimisations or anything like that. We've seen, we heard, we know that it happened. We recognise how traumatic it was and how the waves of that go out and impact people, at the time and then through time, and you summarised it a little bit earlier, just how many people end up affected, and that lives with them for all of their lives. It's not something that disappears. So we understand how broad scale all of that is, and we recognise a responsibility to try and work with people who have experienced that kind of hurt to find pathways to healing. I think that's what the key messages of it are.
Yeah. While a great deal has been achieved since the national apology, there is still more that needs to be addressed moving forward. And in Queensland, there are currently calls for redress, integrated birth certificates, and a simpler process to discharge adoptions, amongst other things. I know you've stepped away from politics now. However, I wonder if I might ask your thoughts on what still needs to be addressed moving forward, or if you have any advice to those who are advocating.
Yeah, I think it's, what's probably best for me is the advice to those advocating. I mean, no longer being directly in Australian politics, I leave the decision-making to those who are there today. But I think in terms of approaching those who are there today, the best advocacy is, the sort of authentic stories that come from the heart. And, whilst all good politicians always want the facts and the figures and the statistics, and, we all want to make policy based on evidence, in this area of forced adoptions, I think also hearing from individuals about their lives and what it's meant for them is incredibly important. And, I know as we prepared as a government for the delivery of the apology, of course, we had, the best possible public service research and all the rest of it. But for me, for the others who are involved, what we really carry with us is the times that we sat quietly and talked to individuals. So, if the advocates involved can bear that in mind, the force of that sort of truth-telling, I think, really does make a difference.
Thank you. And look, thank you so much for your time today and your involvement in this significant event that has contributed to the healing of so many. On the day of the apology, you acknowledged the strength and advocacy of those who spoke truth to power, and you commented that the apology was a direct result of these efforts. We're pleased to report to you that many of our clients and stakeholders have felt a significant shift in their emotional journey over the last 10 years as a direct result of feeling heard, consulted, and supported. So thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. I'm truly touched to hear that.
Julia Gillard, thank you so much for your time today as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the National Apology for Forced Adoptions. Do you have a final message for those around the country who are at events or privately reflecting today?
I think my final message would be 10 years on is the right moment to stop and think back to the day. But I am a big believer that these moments also have to be a time when we gather new energy for the campaigning and advocacy to come. So I think a reflection back, but also thinking forward about what people are going to do next.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll put up some relevant links about forced adoption and the National Apology on our podcast notes page. So be sure to check them out. Before we say goodbye, do you have a story that you'd like to share with us? If so, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And note that Adopt Perspective can be listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.